So tonight we're talking about the healing power of Caduceus. And Truth volunteered this wonderful quote from Paracelsus. All wonders of magic are performed by imagination and faith. Well, that's enough for a talk right there. Where does this idea come from? From the Latin caduceum, a rod-like symbol with winged tips and with two snakes intertwined on the rod itself. It is frequently seen in pictures of Hermes or Mercury, the messenger of the gods. It's used as a symbol by the medical profession, of course, and that's of comparatively recent origin. Caduceus also derived from the Greek charix, meaning herald, and kerchion, signifying herald's badge of office. In classical times, it was a badge which showed that the individual wearing it was a sacred person who was to be shown every courtesy and protection. The symbol is very ancient and probably was derived from the magic wand, which consisted of a branch or rod crowned by a twig branching out each side of the top. This later showed the branches pulled down and wound around the rod, which later were changed to a coiled serpent and still later into twin serpents. One account in mythology ascribes its origin to the god Mercury. Oops, let me go back. I'm just trying to move my image. To the gods Mercury's intervention in a fight between two serpents who, in a token of submission, curled themselves around his wand. The caduceus may also symbolize the integration of the four classical elements in alchemy: the wand corresponding to earth, the wings to air, the serpents to fire and water. The caduceus, of course, has multiple meanings. HPB tells us that metaphysically, the caduceus represents the fall of primeval and primordial matter into gross terrestrial matter, the one reality becoming illusion. Astronomically, the head and tail represent the points of the ecliptic, where the planets and even the sun and moon meet in close embrace. Physiologically, it is the symbol of the restoration of equilibrium lost between life as a unit and the currents of life performing various functions in the human body. Its metaphysical meaning is further elaborated. The trunk of the asvata, the tree of life, and being the rod of the caduceus, grows from and descends at every beginning, every new manvantara or age, from the two dark wings of the swan, Hansa, of life. The two serpents, the ever-living and its illusion, spirit and matter, whose two heads grow from the one head between the wings, descend along the trunk, interlaced in a close embrace. The two tails join on earth, the manifested universe, into one, and this is the great illusion. So then, Hermes, who is this Hermes Trismegistus? In Egypt, Hermes Thoth sweeps through countless centuries as god, king, priest, teacher, and initiate. He was called Hermes to the Greeks and Mercury to the Romans, Enoch to the Jews. He was the god Odin to the Norse, Wotan, and the Buddha or foe to the Asians, scribe of the gods, master of all arts and sciences of medicine, the keeper of the book of life, the Lord of the three worlds, the first intelligence. Revered as Mercury, the planet closest to the sun or God, he was thus the messenger of God. The golden thread passing through and uniting all the guises of Hermes' Thoth is his veiled embodiment and vital teaching of primordial wisdom. According to the oldest known Egyptian cosmogony, Thoth utters the divine word through which the whole cosmos emerges. In the Egyptian mysteries, initiation consisted of 3 stages. So when a human being crossed the threshold to the Egyptian mysteries, he became Hermes, the human embodiment of the god at one level of consciousness. The coadunition of souls allows each being to reflect the pervasive Thoth on some plane of manifestation. When the second degree of initiation was passed, the disciple became Hermes twice great. When the third stage was reached, the individual realized his essential consubstantiality with the God and called himself, with full knowledge of what he was saying, Hermes the thrice great, one with Hermes Trismegistus, Terma Maximus, thrice greatest Hermes, the highest embodiment of wisdom possible in the world of gross manifestation. So here we have an image of Hermes and all the different beautiful symbols associated with him. He was originally said to have written 42 books. 6 were on medicine. Of the rest of them, 6 were on astrology. Another writing attributed to him is the so-called Emerald Tablet, another the divine Parmenides. He is said to have discovered the harmony of voices or sounds, founded treble, bass, and tenor. He is said to have invented the musical instrument, the lyre. He is said also to have taught men letters, astronomy, religious rites, the shepherd watching over his sheep with his staff, Caduceus, the initiate guiding his flock of sheep. At death, he records the results of the weighing of souls in the judgment hall of Osiris. Now, how does our knowledge and understanding of Caduceus lead to healing? And here's an image, another image of bestriding the bird of life, if thou wouldst know, Kalahansa, from the Bhagavad Gita. And having that bird's eye view really is such a blessing. When we lose perspective is usually when we lose our way. But being able to find it again is such an invaluable key to our existence. So what is it that causes most suffering? Well, I thought a disconnect occurs somewhere, whether from knowing who we really are or our septenary nature, a disconnect from others resulting in an inability to socially engage, disconnecting because we feel superior or inferior, disconnecting from karmic responsibility, disconnecting from the divine potentiality or the best in us. Either way, our healing gets stymied. In the glossary, HBB tells us about Caduceus. The Greek poets and mythologists took the idea of the Caduceus of Mercury from the Egyptians The caduceus is found as two serpents twisted round a rod on Egyptian monuments built even before Osiris. The Greeks altered this. We find it again in the hands of Aesculapius, assuming a different form to the wand of Mercurius or Hermes. It is a cosmic, sidereal, or astronomical symbol, as well as a spiritual and even physiological symbol. Its significance changing with its application. It's quite a powerful symbol. Metaphysically, the caduceus represents the fall of primeval and primordial matter into gross terrestrial matter, the one reality becoming illusion. Physiologically, it is the restoration of the equilibrium between life as a unit and the currents of life performing various functions in the body. Hermetic axiom, that HPV was so fond of quoting, as above, so below, really a master key. And let's give a demonstration of how these master keys, how these divine blueprints that are within the caduceus, what they represent on the material plane and celestial planes, and how they fit in. Now, here is an example of the intertwined serpents, right? And they record in our DNA our history, our future for generations. And also, they represent our evolutionary path. And you can see the intertwining and the connections. There's a more colorful picture, of these chemical fundamental connections. Now, here's an image that was taken, which is really fascinating. And we're looking at a spot at the core of the galaxy where a supermassive black hole resides. And that light that's on the left that you see, that little light, emerged from the black hole. And if you look really closely at that image, you see a double helix coming out of it, the intertwined serpents. So out of pralaya, right, a so-called pralaya, out of the nothingness, here comes that sound, that vibration, the carrier, the recorder. We can see why the caduceus represents above and below this same fundamental idea at the core of our being, which transmits in between pralayas, in between black holes, and emerges on the other side of them, electromagnetically projecting life, all of life, and in between life, taking us through it all, representing our evolutionary journey. So it really is quite the symbol. Here's just to include a little bit of neuroscience, as you know, my passion. Lecture given at UCLA a few years ago. And what happens when we're socially disconnected for whatever reason? And they've been studying this. This is a tough one. They're doing studies on schizophrenia. And we're going to see a lot more of that because of the coronavirus, unfortunately. There's quite a bit of viral activity that penetrates into our brains. And I'm sure it moves us along our evolutionary path. But there are hazards, that occur along the way. And I thought what was fascinating about this slide is when you look at all the other research that's going into what affects our mortality rates. They were really surprised to see how socially being disconnected at the bottom, you see that red line at the bottom, for men and for women, is hazardous to one's health. It actually decreases our ability to be healthy, functional, thriving beings. And a lot of the research that's currently being done in neuroscience is about neural networks and how they fire together, because this is an area where we're not quite sure how these disconnects occur. But interestingly enough, schizophrenia most of the times derives from a disconnect in the temporal lobes. And those temporal lobes, those tricky lobes by our ears, where we hear sound, which we use to even create sound and speech and language, are how we connect to our spiritual selves fundamentally, and also how we disconnect or connect to people. So this area is a new area of research, so to speak, and where we need to put most of the emphasis, because it really is an unknown how these work. But what we do know is that neurons that wire together, fire together, and there's a magic in that, and that's in the process of being unfolded in research as we speak. So, universal symbols, just in a summary. I didn't want to get too technical, but in general, universal symbols are a roadmap or a GPS of what is around, inside, and above us. When truth is at such a premium today, with false ideas everywhere, we are really given a gift, a way through it all. In this symbol, there's so many lessons: spirits descending into matter, and the hope for rising back up again. Let's hope at this time we won't get fooled again by the virus, that it's that we're through that phase. But certainly we have to pay attention to how this all unfolds. And then just to close, another beautiful image. May you all bestride the bird of Kalahansa and benefit from the message that it brings. Okay, Judy?
Yeah, a short, simple question. I wonder if you could address the symbolism of the serpent more, because for human beings, on the one level, the serpent is a symbol of evil. We don't like snakes. Most people don't like serpents, don't understand them, want to avoid them. They would just as soon avoid us. On the other level, the serpent is the symbol of wisdom. And they also have so much ability to intertwine themselves. They have so many bones. So they're the perfect symbol of the Caduceus. And I'm wondering, does the Caduceus also, along with the symbolism of the serpent, have to do with the chakras and the spine, the Kundalini? And that can be a healing power or a destructive power, depending on the purity of the person trying to access it. I wonder if you could address that question a little bit. Thank you.
Sure, yes. First of all, the symbolism of the snake. Out of all the different creatures in life, the snake is unusual in that it sheds its skin, right? And so is a potent symbol of reincarnation and transforming ourselves in life. So unfortunately, it's gotten, it's just like deity, and demons. There are positive and there are negative forces, but they're opposites. They're opposites, just the way that there are magnetic poles, and what they are forces. The snake was a symbol of wisdom for quite a while. And then, depending upon uh, cultural expansion, civilizations, etc., politics and, the usual wars, a lot of these symbols were negated. Uh, the snake representing wisdom, in the early book of the Bible, even, that serpent that was tempting the Eve, Adam and Eve, that whole mythology. Well, I always thought here, the knowledge of the tree of good and evil. And why would people not want to partake of the knowledge of good and evil? As a matter of fact, I think, the closest I could come to trying to understand that analogy is that perhaps wisdom is something that we take for granted. And so how do you get people to pay attention to something that's really, really important for them to get? Well, make it a temptation. Make it seem like it's something that you shouldn't have, say, no, you don't, let's put a premium on this because you're not going to value it unless we use reverse psychology on you, so that you really appreciate and not take for granted what wisdom is. Because it's really, really easy to do and to wait until push comes to shove and our back is up against the wall to stop and think about how do we work along with life as opposed to against it. And some of those lessons in life come at quite a premium. So the serpent's wisdom, when we look at the Caduceus, we see a balancing act going on. Just like in our brains, we have two hemispheres, a left hemisphere, a right hemisphere. We all have them. There are polarities, and then we have the corpus callosum that connects both. And in all of our situations in life, we want to consider which vantage point, which point of view is going to give us the most insight into a situation. Sometimes we have to use our physical self, sometimes our emotional self, sometimes our intuitional nature. Sometimes we just have to let go and try to connect to the self of all creatures, and hope that in being able to, again, using the Caduceus, through our practices, create a roadway to opening up to the universal Caduceus, to universal mind, to universal intuition. Some of the quotes contain this idea in the initiations of Hermes of our going from coadunition to consubstantiality with that wisdom. And that possibility exists for all of us. And also the possibility exists for us to be a bridge for others who, for whatever reason, karmically, when they're suffering, can't access some of that wisdom. We can at least be a bridge for others if they can't be a bridge for themselves. So I hope that answered a little bit. But Judy, if there's anything you wanted to add, please do.
No, it's very helpful. Thank you. Let others ask questions. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? Monica?
Where's Monica?
She's talking.
She's muted.
I think Truth might have muted everybody.
I'm
for
just
the
yapping
presentation.
away. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Thank you, Helena. This was just wonderful. A great presentation, but it's also so amazingly timely. And I appreciate it so much, even more so for that reason. But now there's this thing that you mentioned about the Caduceus being a symbol of would indicate a good person. I think you said, and so I'm wanting to know this symbol when used in the field of medicine. Is there a bridge to those two things? How did it come about in the field of medicine? Is that to indicate, as it does, saying this is the symbol of a good person who is a healer or something like that?
Because I was giving that to thought. That's a fairly recent use of the Caduceus symbol. And I was thinking a lot of rods and staffs biblically, when they parted when they were crossing over in the Exodus, and, they had a rod that they separated the water with. And the Egyptians, also, you see a lot of this taking a rod, it turns into a snake and carries wisdom. And it seems like all these warring tribes would demonstrate, their wisdom to each other, and whoever had the most wisdom won, sort of. And you see that, still going on today, new rulers, same old rulers, basically. But I was intrigued by the idea that the symbol, and we see it used on the secret doctrine, in our theosophical literature. You also see it in the theosophical symbols, the caduceus, the serpents, the entwined serpents, and as above, so below. So healing was, I would say, part of the repertoire of the caduceus of Mercury, Hermes, the messenger. So on some level, it reminds me a lot of the astral body. What is it that permeates all the different planes? What is the recorder? What is it that is able to be just the way the astral body, our astral body, we wound our finger and we have a blueprint for it to return back to normal, if we're lucky, and we're able to heal ourselves, with maybe some lessons learned, and not too much lost on us. But so there are many different bodies of knowledge, not only the medical ones, the physical ones. Certainly, they're very important, and they get passed down, to us. That information we take for granted when we use iodine or on a wound, or different herbs, or homeopathy, or magnetism, or sound. Sound has profound qualities. Some of the most profound, HPB tells us, in the secret doctrine. And this is, there's a wisdom, we might say, an ancient primordial wisdom that this symbol represents. Just the wisdom religion couldn't, I think, have a better symbol. And the healing part of it, I believe, is that it demonstrates Well, if the first fundamental were represented by a circle, if you break down a circle, it's a cycle. And when you introduce time, then that that wave turns into a sine wave. And those sine waves are something that I read in EEGs, brainwaves, and frequencies all the time. And those frequencies are sound, they're electricity, they're light, they're magnetism, and we can actually measure them. We can actually measure them, and there are indications of life at different stages. So the primordial wisdom that I think this symbolism of the Caduceus really represents at its core is this idea of how do things connect? How do things connect? Their polarities exist, but there's also what is the magnet, that connects all of it. What is that one life, that one eternal, boundless, immutable, causeless cause that continues? It doesn't end. And I believe when people suffer is when they've lost sight of, maybe temporarily, maybe they've had a trauma, maybe they're having some difficulty, whatever it is, but they've lost access to that primordial wisdom on some level. And they may have had, a tragedy, lost a parent, lost a child, and they say, well, if there was a God, then he wouldn't let this happen, and then they get stuck. And they can get stuck for a long time, or, understanding the primordial religion and how we move through life, when we understand the laws of karma and reincarnation, and that life continues, we can take a position of, we can get a perspective. We can bestride that bird of Kalahansa and say, well, okay, maybe there was a karmic lesson to be learned there. Maybe there was a karmic connection. Maybe there'll be karmic compensation for it in the future. But there is a rule of law. And the sooner that we understand that law and work with the law, the easier life is. Then it flows. Then it flows. And we can take responsibility for our actions, for our decisions. We could chart out the life. So instead of the waves, the great tidal wave of life rolling over us, we can get on top of the surfboard and we could ride through life. So we can put ourselves into the chariot. We can get ourselves into the driver's seat. And that's the best perspective of all. So instead of being run over by life or overwhelmed by life or traumatized by life, we can actually get on top of that bird. But I see so many hands are up. So maybe there's some good questions. Let's see. The first one, it says AAD.
Yeah, he's Odd from the Netherlands.
Odd. Hi, Odd.
Hi, Elena.
Hi.
You talked about the symbol with the rod and the two snakes, and there is also a symbol with the rod and one snake. And I think it's called the rod of Asclepius. What do you know about that? Do you know something about it? The difference between one and another symbol?
Well, I know that there are differences to the symbols. Let me just grab it so I get this correct. But if you want to contribute something, please do.
Well, I was looking at it, and it is this. It only has the one serpent going up, and
Yes.
so, but with the two serpents, it's as you said there that it gives us the opportunity with karma and reincarnation to heal ourselves. with the pairs of opposites, we can heal ourselves.
Yeah.
And so, but with the other one, and in fact, it was an American military person that picked the caduceus as the symbol. And he did so by accident, but we know, of course, that there are no accidents. So the other one does symbolize, with the one serpent going up, symbolizes healer. And I think that the caduceus with the two symbolizes that we all have the power to heal ourselves. And that seems to be, but it was in 1902 that it was picked as a symbol.
So coming above the two opposites, the two pairs of opposites, that is the way to heal ourselves. And do I understand it correctly?
Yes, I would think so. What do you think, Helena?
Yeah, I think that the single serpent would probably be, the student raising himself up, right? Through his own study, through his own self-induced and self-devised efforts. It's as if one is looking from the outside and one is looking from the inside, depending upon your perspective. They're both good, and we get the gist of the meaning. But I hope that helps. And I see Marlon, you have your hand raised?
You'll have to unmute yourself.
Yes, unmute yourself, please.
There we go. I'm sorry.
Appreciate
Just took me a
it.
while
Thank
to
you.
get to it.
Mhm.
Thank you so much. First of all, it's good to see you again. I saw you quite a ways back, and both very interesting. But a couple of things have come to mind. One is that for the ancient Greeks, in their history, in their mythological history, they would talk about a pythos, a spirit, if you will. And it's reminiscent of, say, a dragon or something like that in the Eastern culture. And that spirit could be replaced. So when Zeus comes, he replaces the old pythos, the old ethos, if you will, of an era. The other thing is, I find it interesting, we're speaking of the two snakes, and HPB talks about Fohat, the spiral power that you suggested. And the opposites, Lucifer and Satan, light and dark, North Pole, South Pole, and so on. And so those are spiraling through time. So we've got the idea of cyclical time, spiral time, around a central core, a central unity. I also find myself thinking of cyclical time in terms of the seasons. The South Pole, the North Pole, spring, fall, summer, winter, and so on. And so this spiral time is not just a circle, it's a spiral, in fact, like the snake and the caduceus. Also in Greek mythology, the thyrsus was also a powerful symbol similar to the caduceus because of the pine cone on the top. And so I don't know if you can see this, but this is an image. There you go. It's like a pine cone, and and there it's looking from the top, right?
Mhm.
And so you have, as you were saying, Helena, you were saying there are these intersections of time, of forces, if you will, or of time, if you will. I have to say that in my 70s, I have been not so pleasantly surprised that there are recurrences of karma, cyclical karma. And unfortunately, I've had to look back at a few horrible mistakes I've made and seen the influence of them, which were more predominant in my 70s than they ever were previously in my life with their karmic effects. I'd be curious to know what other people think about that. But also the interesting thing about this pine cone is that it's called the Fibonacci number series, 1, 1, 3, 5, 8, etc., and so on. And this apparently is a common symbol, a common number in nature of these cycles interacting with one another. Here it says, pine cones likewise unfold in similar patterns. The seed-containing scales grow along intersections of two sets of helixes, spirals that unfold in three-dimensional space, like the DNA molecule. In plan view, the spiral projections of these helixes resemble miniature galaxies. In the cone of the Jeffrey pine, figure 131, 13 helixes move in one direction and 8 move in the other, closely approximating the golden section proportions, the Greek 1 to 1.6, which was very involved with musical harmony and proportions of the human body and so on. And one more thing. As you were talking, I was trying to get these visuals here. This I find is very interesting. Can you see that? It's a plant right here.
Yeah.
And it says, the distribution of leaves around the central stem is governed by the Fibonacci series. 3 leaves in 5 turns, 5 leaves in 8 turns, and so on. And so it just is very interesting how these cycles of time are inherent in nature. And Orpheus, of course, was fascinated with plants growing in cyclical patterns like that. And so, as you suggested, Helena, there are these karmic impulses that have indeed some kind of regularity, some kind of measure to them. Yeah, so I just thought it was kind of interesting that the Greeks and these number series and all of that, which have to do with our periods, cyclical periods of time and opposition and so on.
Elena?
Yeah, go ahead, Jonathan.
Well, I was just going to say you might want to look at Truth's contribution of the first one
Yeah, you have to scroll up a bit.
in the
Okay.
chat.
I could just say it.
Could you read it? Thank you, Truth.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I had 2 observations. One, the presentation that was just given on the logic of rebirth. We had an image from the Egyptian arch of a building of the winged sun disk, and I found the winged sun disk similar to the Caduceus because there are wings like on the Caduceus. There are 2 serpents, and then the central sun, which if you've taken art and you're familiar with foreshortening, and you have a staff, like if you have a staff and you turn it sideways, it would look like a circle. And
I just thought it pertained to what Marlon was talking about looking at things from above, below, the way Truth's, the circle becomes, what does he say? What did you say?
the circle is the staff, basically, from above, from a foreshortened perspective.
Okay, let's
But, also, if you look at Odd, he has the theosophical symbol up, for his picture. And I was thinking about how when I look at that, it's almost as if I was looking at the Caduceus from above and inside of it, because you see the 2 waves connecting back and forth. So it's a representation from above, looking into the working of things, of our nature, of our spiritual nature, of really of all of life. And then the symbol above, the evolutionary symbol, also another representation, just like the Caduceus, the wheel of life is associated also, with the 2 intersecting crosses and then movement, and how that occurs. Did Laura have her hand up?
Yeah,
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Jonathan. Yeah.
I think that Truth also put in, or is a quote on the staff. We haven't talked about the staff and its importance. And I thought maybe that would be good because what is that? And you said at the beginning it represented the earth and the earth experience. So how can we understand that center?
Mhm, mhm. I think the staff is a very interesting one, and that it's been picked up by bishops and popes and ministers, religious figures for religious rites. And we carry a staff too, right? Our symbol, our theosophical symbol is like our staff, but it physically represents that was ancient wisdom religion, and are disseminating it, are using it as our, we use the staff to walk with, to take steps with, to move. And so the revelations, the inspirations, the intuition, our eternal intuition, our connection, to the best, our divine potentiality, to the whole hierarchies, to the Dian Chohans, to the masters, to the angels, to the higher spheres. There's a bridge. And Mercury, I was studying earlier this week, and Mercury itself, the element, has some very interesting properties because it's sort of an in-between, like what the astral does, connecting things. Mercury is a metal that looks like a liquid, right? So it doesn't really look like what we think about as a metal. It's in an in-between state. It's, and there are these in-between states when we transform from one kingdom to another. And sometimes you see these examples, HPV points out, in between lives, because it's not a straight linear process, it's circular. There's a back and forth. There's adjustments that are made. And that reminds me a lot of our plastic nature, our neuroplastic nature. Yeah, as we're on this planet and we're experiencing all these changes that we have some responsibility for, but what if we were just going through the universe on this planet and we were meeting differences in phase, in perceptions of time, heat, temperature, we would have to adjust, and the astral body allows for that. Mercury, we can be like Mercury. We can adjust ourselves to our challenges. We have that kind of flexibility. It takes a bit of time, but the truth of the matter is that we can and do adjust, and that's a hopeful idea. Jonathan, is your hand up?
It was, but I noticed the truth's ahead of me. So
Go ahead, Jonathan. I'll go after you.
Oh.
Well, I had a question about this duality thing that you brought up. I'm going to loosely connect it to neurons that fire together, wire together. But going back to the duality thing, a lot of the theosophical and philosophical teaching is given in the form of dialogues. And you have the dialogues of Plato. You have the key to theosophy. You have the HPB dialogues, which is really, and also the transactions. And other things that I can't think of right now. There's like in some of the Upanishads are like that. Anyway, so in other words, and in Bhagavad Gita, the obvious one, okay? And there's always Arjuna questioning and so forth, and Krishna, just, being Krishna. And all except for the 7th chapter, I guess Krishna kind of does all the talking in that one, but the rest of them are dialogue. I was wondering if you could speak to that and how that might be kind of a life-giving modality.
Well, what's so important about dialogue? And, I think about when I was younger, in Central Park, they had Buddhist monks who would have these, discourses,
Yeah.
back and forth dialogues, and they would challenge each other.
Oh yeah.
And and that challenge actually causes growth, right? So when we have one mind, it's got its limitations. It can expand and embrace new ideas, but when you have a dialogue and there's more than one person involved, you have that many more points of view, that many more possibilities of connection and expansion. So when they say that neurons that fire together wire together, that happens to us here when we come together in a study group, and we study the teachings. So in Plato's Republic, which I love to read in my spare time, he certainly recognized the need for dialogue, but also the need for being able to sustain a dialogue with someone. I mean, for example, that there were different natures that were represented in his dialogues and discourses, and they're speaking to a personality type, or someone who I was reading one, and we're speaking to somebody else's point of view, and that person may be stuck. That person may have a view that's limited because they're slothful, or they think they know it all, or they just can't let somebody else in to have another point of view because they can't distrust their brains and say, my brains might be giving me faulty information, because we want to trust our brains, but sometimes our brains disconnect, and we need something that's larger than ourselves, that we can access. And in those moments when our back is up against the wall and push comes to shove, is usually when we try to reach for that intuitive leap into our past selves, our wisdom, from our past lives, but we can also access others, wisdom. And that's an expansive, and I think a magical quality, really. I was going to ask the class a question tonight. I was going to say, what, just like Jonathan, you picked up on it, what makes it so magical and so much more powerful when a group comes together? What's that? What force of the astral are we tapping into when we do that, when we study together, when we dialogue, when we discourse? What's that about?
Do you mind if I just...
Please.
It just
somehow I didn't hear you.
he froze.
Somehow the internet.
Truth froze until he unfreezes. Am I frozen, John?
No, you're good.
Okay.
I happen to know where Truth is, and I know that his internet's a little wobbly. So
okay. Truth, maybe you could go out and come back in. Marlon, I see his hand is up and Judy's hand is up. Does anybody else want to say something?
Well, if we read the chats, we could get an idea of what Truth and Monica have been talking about.
Oh, maybe I should read the chats first. Then let's go up to.
Yeah, Truth and Monica have a whole thing going on over there.
If you start with, do you think the imagery of the shepherd?
Okay, Truth says, do you think the imagery of a shepherd holding a staff has to do with being conscientious? Is it being conscientious which connects the ideas of the quick movement of a messenger God with that of a shepherd, of our own minds serving as a watcher? Is Mercury representative of the conscience? Very interesting. And then let's see. I'll try to get my mouse. Go down. Monica says, very interesting, this idea. The shepherd definitely involved in that sense of dharma, duty, obedience. And definitely. By gut instinct here, I feel that Mercury in some aspect is definitely connected with conscience, that communicator of higher thought, in the sense that children feel loved when they are disciplined. Thy rod, thy staff, they comfort me. That's a good biblical quote. And then Monica says, Truth says, that reminds me of the association between the earth and stability. In the I Ching, there's the imagery of the standing still mountain. And then Laura, the shepherd uses the staff as an extension of his arm to guide the sheep. It is a symbol of wisdom. And Monica, beautiful, being grounded but not stuck, a majestic type of anchoring, the image of a mountain. Did Truth get back in or no? Okay. Jonathan, should we call on the other hands that are up?
Yeah, right.
Okay. Marlon, you want to say something?
Oh, just
Judy?
a little something. Someone earlier was curious about the central staff. And I think I just read today in the Secret Doctrine that staff represents the incarnating ego, the reincarnating ego. And so you've got these spirit and matter revolving around. In other words, I suppose incarnation and excarnation. You've got them revolving around the ego, the spiritual ego that goes through time, which I think is very interesting, especially in terms of what Jonathan was pointing out about the dialogue. That indeed, as in the Bhagavad Gita, it says, it's you have these moments of meditation and you have times of action. And when those two come together, then we've got wisdom. And so one of the things I really liked about the earlier discussion on reincarnation several times back was how meaningful life became. This life became. It's not as though, well, let's get this one over and I'll head off to, some better place. But indeed, it is very meaningful to have questions about life, curiosity about life, insights about life, and perfectibility. There's a lot of hope in that kind of thing. And it's as though your question about the group coming together is like a semblance of the oversoul. We've got all these people here, all these wonderful people here, and they are representative of all those perspectives unite, and they're representative of a uniting oversoul on different realms other than just on Zoom. Yeah. Really wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. And there's that wonderful phrase, a biblical phrase, wherever two or more of you are gathered in my name, there I am also. So the dialogue is a way of bringing up the universal wisdom, of dialing it up, of calling up that astral connection, of actually using that force. The dialogue creates that force, makes it become available. It's available within us, and it's available in connection to others. Truth, were you able to get in? Hi, Truth. Or Judy, you wanted to say something, Judy?
Yes. Just briefly, I know Odd earlier mentioned Asclepius, who is the Greek god of healing that Hippocrates knew about. But it seems that when we talk about healing, there are really three different planes. There's the physical plane, which I think we can't do without. I mean, when I had my auto accident, if I hadn't gone to Stanford Orthopedics, I would have died. And then there's also the psychic healing, I mean, psychiatry, and there's also the spiritual healing. And I mean, how would the spiritual apply? I have a friend who recently reached out to me. He spent his entire life as a Christian Scientist. And for the first time since we were like 3 and 4 years old, he told me there were things physically wrong with him. He admitted it. And he's now in a care home. And I said, you've got to talk to your doctor. You've got to take care of this on the physical plane. You have to call the conservator of your estate. I mean, I told him what to do, and I have this poor man's mother died of diabetes because she wouldn't take insulin. But he's finally realized that it doesn't help just to pray about it. But I think that there clearly is a room for spiritual knowledge and the healing level. There's a room for psychiatry, but there's also the need for the physical. And it seems the ancient Greeks knew all this through Asclepius. So how do we know when to differentiate? That seems to be so important. And I'm so glad that my friend is finally admitting that he needs help on the physical plane and he's getting it. Because I don't want to have happen to him what happened to his mother. It was very tragic.
Yeah, there comes a time, and I think this is the tricky part. You know, time has so much to play in this as well, and phase. We all have different phases of our life, and we may think, okay, I used, let's say, prayer, and it may have had an effect in one situation, but then we overuse that key or whatever it is, you know, whatever formula we have, and we think, okay, this is the formula. It worked really well for me. It's got to work for you too. You know, and that might be the worst thing because my formula and your formula might not be the same. And then there are times when people are not ready to hear it. They're not ready to heal. And it's almost as if they have to exhaust their karma in a certain direction. And to be able to respect that and to not push it, to not be too pushy with our wisdom, you know, to not come across as a know-it-all, you know, and being willing to listen. I think with the dialogues, one of the important things in healing work is, you know, do I resonate at a frequency that can be of service to this person? Because if I'm not, I better get out of the way and let somebody else in who might be, you know, who might hold the key to that healing. Because that relationship, you know, to another person is 60% of the healing process, no matter what they do, you know. So that being able to connect and form a dialogue is key. But, you know, if it's not us, forcing it isn't going to make it any better or any worse. There has to be some level of being able to connect, to go to where a person is so important, right? You know, and to stand alongside of them without judgment, you know, and to be able to have some perspective and pick a moment. We can certainly, I think, sow seeds. And some of those seeds are, you know, they're bound to blossom and to bear fruit. There might not be that moment, but we can be like Johnny Appleseed and sow some of these ideas. But most of the times, I feel as if when someone's really stuck somewhere, somehow, there's some question of life that needs to be answered that they haven't been able to come to, whatever it is, a trauma, past life, past hundreds of lives, you know, family karma, family DNA. We're just starting to look at that. Sometimes we might be compensating for, you know, family karma as well. And that's our dharma. That we've chosen to help, you know, other people that we're associated with, and we're put into those positions where, you know, our learning is at a premium, and it feels stressful. But you know, if we're just patient, we will get as much out of the process as the person that we're trying to help, if not more. You know, but it's all good. You know, it's all good. And Jonathan, we went way over, didn't we? Why didn't you stop me?
Well, we got 3 more minutes.
3 more minutes. Oh, okay.
We're not over. Do you want to talk to Truth a little bit?
Sure, Truth. Go ahead. We
Well,
read a lot of what you wrote. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. I was just noticed the connection when you had your presentation and associated Mercury with a shepherd. I thought it was interesting. and reminded me of like the shepherd is always watching. And anything on the outside can be applied to our own minds on the inside. So that watcher element of ourself, like being conscientious, there's a certain rapidity of movement to that, like a quick reaction that and as Mercury is associated with being quick, as far as I understand, like communication.
And
I
quickening.
wonder what you thought.
Yeah, and Mercury's closest to the sun, happens to be the planet that's closest to the sun. So if we want to connect to that spiritual sun, right, communication is one way that we can do it, right, to bring about the sun full of that vitamin D and that life-giving, light-giving force. I read an article this week in one of the quantum physics papers that they found an element that, because there are loads and loads of elements outside of the periodic table now. We know that it's infinite, not finite. And this one element they found had an electron that jumped out a little bit. That made it, an in-between, like Mercury. And when they focused light on this particular element, they were actually able to observe a change in the electromagnetic frequency that element gave off. And it was the first time that they've been able to do that, to show that adding light into a situation. And I thought of the sun, and what it does for us, that the amount of light, that shines on an element, on us, affects our field, our electromagnetic field. It changes our frequency, and it does. It's healing. Vitamin D is a healing energy, and we can get that from the sun. So all of this is interrelated to healing, and we have other topics that are interesting that are coming up soon, right, Jonathan?
Well, Helena, thank you very, very much. You are a master conversationalist. And you all the synapses you can just see with all the chats, and everybody's minds are just going, and so you've just got all these neurons and synapses electrified. So what a great job. Thank you so much for what you put into this. And